Hey, this is Zen Zenith just sneaking in to say check out the House Show with Zen Zenith, that's me, on Dragon Wagon Radio. The House Show is a live concert series featuring stripped-down performances and interviews with amazing singer-songwriters. We do the whole thing in front of a real live audience at a real live house and package the whole thing up into a podcast for you to experience in the ease of your home or car. Real intimate performances, real intimate conversations with great people. Check it out at thehouseshowshow.com or on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else good podcasts are found. We'll see you there.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, Quiller Nation, to yet another exciting episode of exploration into the greatest literary mystery of all time. Before I introduce this next incredible guest, I want to take a few minutes to thank you all for making this the most popular Shakespeare authorship podcast on any and all networks. And I'd like to remind you that we can always use some additional ratings and reviews of the show at the various platforms where that option is available to you, the listener. Won't you please take a few moments to give the show a 5-star rating and post an outstanding review so that new listeners will be assisted in finding us and joining the Quiller Nation. I want to welcome all of you to this very special episode. It is the culmination of our Recorded in London series from when I was there for the Vere Society gathering at Hatfield House in October of this year. I know I've said it so many times already, but it does bear repeating. I had such a wonderful time in England while I was there, and it was the DVS members, both at the event and those who I was able to sit down with for episodes of the show, that made it such a fantastic experience, including the exquisite lady that you are about to meet. And I'd like to introduce my guest for this fabulous episode. Her name is Annabel Leventon. She is an accomplished actress as well as a theater educator. And I understand, Annabel, you were also a member of a very famous rock band at one time in your life. We are in her home for this wonderful episode here in Camden Town, England. And the walls are graced with photos of Annabel with some very, very famous people. She's had an illustrious career, and she is making a presentation. At the time of this recording, we are the day before she's about to make a presentation to the Vere Society about a series of masterclasses that she is going to be preparing on Shakespeare's women with an Oxfordian slant. Am I surmising that correctly?
Yes, smack on the nail.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to your home and for taking the time to share with me and my listeners what you've been working on and what you're doing. And of course, I have a gazillion questions for you. So let's get started right off the bat. Tell me first about this Shakespeare's Women project that you're working on, because that's the first and foremost forefront of what's happening with you.
Well, it came about by a series of apparently random things, which is what I really love, because you think when these things come together, you think it's serendipity. God is helping us move that way. And with almost everything I have to do with the authorship question, things like that, they come together in little clusters, and there's a little bit more hope that the truth will come out. Not in the sense that these masterclasses are going to help with that on one level. It's the DVS have had, I think, a wonderful idea, which is to do a series of masterclasses on the subject of Shakespeare's women, because it's an unparalleled a number of extraordinary creations, more than any other dramatist in any other time. And I've played quite a few of them, and I've seen many more of them, and they still grab us after 400 years. So the idea of these classes is that I will work with young actors, either just straight out of drama school or about to go into drama school. The younger the better, really. And I will also work with sixth formers. That's the class. There's 16 to 18-year-olds in our schools before they go to college. And I've got a small group there that I could and wish to work with, because you can really shape things and change things for the future if you can get them young.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that approach.
So the idea is to make a toolkit for children at school who read Shakespeare and mostly have no idea what it's about, and they're taught by people who don't like it. They come away from school loathing the idea of Shakespeare, and I am passionate about it. Shakespeare is indelibly part of my life, as well as now the authorship question. But that came a lot later. But first, I had to fall in love with Shakespeare, which I did when I was 11. And I was taken to see, this is going to be very rambly, do you mind?
No, it's of course that, I always tell my guests that my listeners are looking for a conversation. They like to feel like they're in the room with us while we're just having a conversation. So I always say, don't look at it as an interview. Let's just talk about things.
Okay.
So absolutely, stream of consciousness is fabulous. And I know that they are all excited to know. That's why I prefaced the episode with the fact that we are here in your home in England. And hopefully they'll feel like they're here with us.
Well, that would be nice. It's a large room. I could accommodate some of you, but possibly not all at once. But no, I fell in love with theatre when I was 5. I was taken to see a production of Peter Pan, the play. And I was taken backstage afterwards because my aunt knew the actress playing Peter Pan, who is a very, very famous actress called Joan Greenwood. People might remember from Kind Hearts and Coronets, a wonderful black and white film from 1950-something. And she was also in the famous and wonderful film of The Importance of Being Earnest as Gwendolen. And I had no idea. I was very short-sighted, it is fair to say. So I saw what I saw. But in the play, Tinkerbell, who is the fairy who looks after Peter and worships him, was played in this production by a little light bobbing about the stage and a little shiver of bells. And I believed in her completely, so much so that when towards the end of the play, when Tink has taken poison that was intended for Peter and she's dying, the actor playing Peter would come, and in this instance, Joan Greenwood is the most amazing voice, which you might remember from Kind Hearts and Coronets. She used to go, "Oh, Louis, oh, Louis," I mean, the sexiest thing. And she came to the front of the stage and said, "Children, Tink is dying. If you believe in fairies, clap your hands. You can rescue her from this. You will heal her if you believe in fairies. Do you believe in fairies?" And then, well, of course, I jumped up to my feet and clapped my hands like mad. I had also no idea that this was a woman. It was a boy dressed in little autumn leaves sewn together and a beautiful little cap of like an acorn cap. And so my aunt took me backstage. I was already in love with this thing I'd just seen, and went into Joan Greenwood's dressing room, which was a lovely old-fashioned tiny dressing room, dark and with all her costumes hanging up and lights round the mirror. And I was thunderstruck to discover that Peter had been played by a woman. And I now think that had more of an impression upon me than the play itself.
There's a very famous story about Sarah Bernhardt playing Hamlet. And she played Hamlet into her 70s. And there's a classic story, and I don't know if it's a real story, if it's a myth, but it has to do with a young girl, teenage girl who just fell in love with Hamlet, the prince, and saw the show over and over and over again, became obsessed. And the parents wrote to Sarah and said, can you please do something because it's getting out of control? She's obsessed and we need to, do something to break this. And so according to the story, Sarah Bernhardt invited them to bring the young girl backstage after a performance. And so they did. And she met the girl in her dressing gown with no makeup and looking very old and tired and haggard after this long, grueling, sweaty performance as Hamlet, and said, "Here's your handsome prince." And apparently the girl was so distraught, she went and drowned herself in Ophelia style. Now, I don't know if that's a true story, but it kind of relates to what you're saying, right? It was devastating to you, I'm sure, at some point to go, wait a minute, this is reality and my fantasy has been destroyed.
Well, at 5, you're not thinking quite like that.
No, I guess not.
And I do so hope that is not a true story, because that would be so awful to have your dreams shattered like that.
Well, it's tragedy on top of tragedy, right?
Yes.
And so it's probably meant for effect, I think.
Yeah, Peter Pan has a sort of happy ending, and it's all about belief in magic. And for me, theatre encapsulates magic. And
Indeed.
I got it from that time. And the fact that a woman, A, was playing Peter, and B, was allowing me to see her afterwards, made me fall in love with backstage as well as being an audience member, I think. And I went away determined to be an actor, and that never changed. There is also, I just have to tell you, there's another apocryphal story when Joan Greenwood was playing Peter, that a very famous comedian called Hermione Gingold was in the audience one night. And when Joan came down to the front of the stage and said, "Oh, children, if you believe, clap your hands if you believe in fairies. Do you believe in fairies?" Hermione Gingold from the back of the stalls went, "Believe in them? I know hundreds of them."
And that's very true about most of us in the theater too, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is. But so rolling on to Shakespeare. I was 11, and another aunt took me to Stratford to see a production of Merchant of Venice. And I remember us.
It's a heavy play to take an 11-year-old and have your first experience with Shakespeare.
Yes, it was. Well, she did a very sensible thing. Her daughter was my same age as me, and we were very, very close. We still are. And we sat down in their flat and we read the play before we went. And I think that must have been my first introduction to any Shakespeare. And it's fair to say I don't remember much about the production now, but I remember being awestruck by going to the theatre and seeing such a big play. And I didn't go to theatre. I mean, we went to children's plays at Christmas. We didn't go to cinema. After the war, nobody had any money. My parents certainly had none. So we didn't go for outings much. So this was a major treat, a day's outing. And before the show, we were showed around Stratford, and we went to Shakespeare's birthplace and were shown that. And we were shown all of this. Here was his little desk where he worked as a schoolboy, and here was this thing, and we walked into another room. I don't remember much about it, but I do remember seeing this wooden crib, and whoever was showing us round saying, "This is the crib that the little baby Shakespeare lay in when he was first born." And I remember thinking, bullshit. And that part of it, I then put aside. I never went any further with it, because in England, the idea that our major hero, our greatest product, our greatest tourist attraction over and above the royal family might not be the person that is being sold to us is not, you cannot countenance it. People get very, very, very angry.
I believe that, yes.
They're not open to it like, Americans can be open to it because A, they're more open-minded mostly, and B, it's not their great hero, the greatest writer on God's earth ever. To call him into question is sacrilege. And I don't remember hearing anything more about Shakespeare, perhaps. No, I didn't talk about it to anyone. I just thought, that can't be right. It can't be right. I was a cynical little 11-year-old, shall
Apparently
we say.
you were. Of course you must recall your very first Shakespeare play that you were in and your first role that you ever played of the great bard.
Oh, yes, of course I do. I think I remember most of the roles I've ever played rather well. Especially the further and further they get, the clearer and clearer they become, of course. But no, at school, but it was a girls' school, you see, and I wanted to be an actress. Everybody knew I wanted to be an actress. But when we started doing Shakespeare, and Miss McKinley, who was our English teacher, would cast the plays, I always got cast as men. And so the first part I played was Demetrius in The Dream. And her style of directing was, you stand there, on that line you turn half there, you may make one step there, you may raise your hand there. It was acting by numbers.
Oh, heavens. Oh, no.
And Demetrius is actually a tricky little part anyway. But I learnt something doing it. I won't say I wouldn't rather have played any of the other women. But what I did learn was somewhere in the quarrel scene when Demetrius is completely in love with Helena because of Puck putting the juice in his eye. And the girls are having their major row. I was supposed to just stand there, and which I did for quite a while. And then, so I don't know what possessed me, but I was behind Helena, and she was at her worst, screaming at Hermia. And I remember stepping forward and just at the back of her, just touching her curls, completely besottedly in love. And it brought the house down. And Miss McKinley never told me off. So I discovered a penchant for comedy in that. So that was useful.
I have a terrible pet peeve about productions of that show that are so austere that way, where there is just nothing happening but words flying around the stage. And I believe that scene is probably one of the most difficult scenes in all of Shakespeare because it should be filled with frenetic action. They are all, as you say, they're under this spell or being
and they're crazed.
Deceived by this.
It's midsummer.
Yes,
they're
and
crazed.
they're teenagers in love and hormonal and out of control. And anyone who's ever worked with teenagers know they can't keep their hands to themselves when they're not in love, let alone when they're under the spell of magic. So I always hate to see that when I see that. And whenever I do that show, I just actually last June produced that show, my 10th time, and the actors get a workout. It's a 12-minute scene beginning to end, if done correctly. And by the end of that 12 minutes, they should be out of breath.
Oh, good God, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, I did do The Dream later on. Once I was a professional actor in Regent's, just up the road, Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, and playing Helena instead of Demetrius. And yeah, you get supercharged doing that stuff. It really is the most wonderful scene to do. But school productions then, and possibly now, it was very prescriptive and not much fun to do.
And I'm going to guess Miss McKinley never mentioned the Shakespeare Authorship Mystery to you while you were in school.
Do you know what? There isn't a single person who has ever mentioned it except when I was at Oxford as a student. I remember people talking about it and saying, oh, yes, well, Francis Bacon wrote the plays. It wasn't Shakespeare. And I went, well, who cares? We've got the plays. And that was my fairly fixed position till about 20 years ago when somebody mentioned it. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, I can't believe you're this ignorant. So I'm bringing you a book. And he said...
That's a great way to convince people to be open-minded about something, is to accuse them of ignorance.
Well, he was quite right. It worked, because he brought me a very dog-eared paperback version of Charlton Ogburn's The Mysterious William Shakespeare, and said, educate yourself. And I read it, and that was it. I thought, all right, I better take this on board now. And I'm now a trustee of the Shakespeare Authorship Trust. I'm a member of the the De Vere Society. If you look in my hallway, see, I've got about 50 books about the subject, and one of my missions, there's two missions really. One is to keep Shakespeare alive, the use of Shakespeare, and have people love it the way I do. And the other mission is to educate them about the likelihood of the man from Stratford ever having written a word.
Exactly. Having ever written a word, let alone a poem, let alone a line in a poem, let alone
we don't know that he was literate.
1,500 line role like Hamlet.
We don't know that he was literate. His two daughters weren't. You know, someone who writes these amazing, powerful, eloquent, educated women would not educate his own daughters. It's unthinkable.
I'm so glad that we circled back to that way, because that was something I was going to mention. And, you know, the fact that you are focusing this masterclass series and the presentation that you're going to give for the De Vere Society. By the time our audience hears this, you will have already given that presentation to the De Vere Society at their autumn event at Hatfield House. But I raised that issue a lot, especially to my female friends and the actresses in my own Shakespeare company. I talk about that regularly. So you have to try to justify these two people, the writer who wrote these magnificent roles, and so many of them. And I say he's one of the first feminist writers, quite honestly, because of the strength and the power of some of those women and the way they stand up to the society around them. The patriarchy that they're living under, and the choices they make, the very extreme and very bold choices they make.
Given their circumstances.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's Juliet refusing to marry at the risk of being thrown out of her home and abandoned by her family, or Portia deciding she's going to disguise herself as a lawyer and show up in court. I mean, these are crazy choices that I can't imagine were ever made in the time period that the plays are set, let alone being produced and presented this way in a dramatic setting, right?
Well, there have always been women doing these things, and Romeo and Juliet as a story was ancient. The Veronese know it's their story. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years before Shakespeare, and Juliet did those things. But for a dramatist to take them and decide to shape them so that we now have Juliet's one of the most famous characters ever from theatre. He's completely changed the landscape by giving us, I agree with you, by giving us these women and giving them power. And if they didn't have power, they would show their anger and their revolt against the way they were caged in society. So they're still very relevant to us now, it seems to me. I
say this regularly. I have three beautiful, wonderful children. My two eldest are both girls. And as a father of daughters, I cannot wrap my head around the idea that the man who created these roles, these fabulous Rosalind, the largest female role in the entire canon, for instance, is a magnificent role. The idea that the man could write these roles and then not teach his daughters to read so that they could appreciate those roles, that is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous on the face of it that no one can, I can't believe people can believe that. It makes absolutely zero sense. And when you say that to certain people, the light bulb goes off, right? They realize, oh, wait a minute, you might be onto something here.
It's one example I use a lot because I think people simply don't know that his parents were illiterate. They don't know that his daughters were illiterate. They don't think. And why would they? But when you mention that one fact, well, and there's another fact, the fact that in his will, he hasn't left one single book or manuscript. He doesn't apparently own any books, and they were very precious and prized things. So I use that one, and I use the thing about education. And you see mouths slowly open and jaws slowly drop. And that's part of what we want to do in the masterclasses.
I think it's a fabulous idea. And I think that one of the things as an Oxfordian and as somebody who dedicates a certain portion of my life to the Shakespeare Authorship Mystery and sharing it with others, I think that the women of Shakespeare have been underexplored in this way. And I think the connection to the women who influenced these characters to be written, the muses, as it were, for these female roles, I think has been underexplored as well. And I always look at the women in the Earl of Oxford's life and the parallels that you can find between the women in his life who had a major influence and impact on his life and what we see in the female roles in the canon. And I'm wondering, are you planning on going into that at all with what you're doing?
Well, we don't quite know the way it's going to develop. We've got an outline, and we have actually done the first episode on Romeo and Juliet. And there is, it's impossible with video, people's attention spans, and I'm amazed that you do these lengthy things for podcasts, because who listens to them? Who has time to listen to them? Apparently they do.
All 7 of my listeners tune in every 2 weeks.
But with film, I've been saying, look, half an hour is the maximum we can devote to one episode. That's what people are used to seeing on television. We might go to 40 minutes, but that's the most we can do. So I have to compress what we do, but the first half is to get people hooked on Shakespeare, basically, and to get them to fall in love, hopefully, with the characters the way I have done, through the text and the language and what's behind them. And then the hope is that once we've made it popular, which is what we really need it to get it to a wide audience, not of Shakespeare doubters, but people who need to know more about Shakespeare because they're about to audition for drama school, say, and bring them in. And once it becomes popular, which I think it could be, then you can start saying, okay, let's look at the man behind the works, and that's what we will be doing. And of course, when I say Shakespeare's women, I've left myself room to discuss the women in The Man from Stratford's life and look at the women in De Vere's life. Mm-hmm. And you think, okay, there's his mother who sent him off at 4, like most aristocratic children, the men, sometimes the women, were sent off to have an education from the age of 4. And lived somewhere else. Mm-hmm. She certainly didn't breastfeed him. Nobody did that in the upper classes. Mm-hmm. So one gets the impression not the most motherly of mothers, possibly a bit like Lady Capulet. I don't know, maybe.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And the line that comes to mind, and partially because I happen to be teaching Macbeth to high school students right now, as a matter of fact. But one of the lines that comes to mind is when Lady Macduff accuses her husband. She says he wants the natural touch. And Lady Macduff says about her husband, because he runs off to England to find Malcolm and leaves them unprotected. And she says he wants the natural touch, meaning he doesn't he lacks that caring, that fatherly, that parental.
That empathy.
And I believe that Marjorie Golden certainly was.
I think we would look woman. Harshly upon Marjorie Golding, though we know she's a product of her generation, her position, and her husband, all of that. But nonetheless, she didn't try and cross any lines on that level, except when her husband dies and her son should have taken over the kingdom, as it were. He has to go to Cecil's as a ward of court, and within 6 months she marries somebody he neither knows nor likes.
The funeral meats supplied the wedding table.
Exactly. Now,
right out of Hamlet.
For me, you look at Hamlet, it's a very confused picture, because Hamlet sometimes is very young and sometimes he isn't. It dodges about. And this, to me, says someone who could not let this subject go. It was not a commercial playwriter who said, oh, no, we have 2.5 hours maximum and we can't do that, and I won't rewrite, it's published now. No, this is a guy who had to go over and over and over something that meant so much to him, he couldn't let it go. And for my money, if Gertrude doesn't equate to an 11-year-old's view of his mother being so devastated by the loss of his father that she marries again and effectively carves him out, that's, to me, that's the emotional power behind that is an 11, 12-year-old's view of what went wrong right early on. And Hamlet then is very, very young.
That's another one of the most difficult scenes in all of Shakespeare is the Gertrude's closet scene.
I haven't had to do it.
It's so intense, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the entire canon. It's just so packed full of visceral, raw emotion.
Yes.
And it's so powerful for the actor and actress working that scene together. It's an incredible experience as a performer, and incredible to watch when two solid performers have nailed it down tightly, you know?
If you ever can, I don't know, because it seems, Hamlet's viewpoint is completely skewed in so many ways. So trying to chart your way through that, and the challenges that face him, trying to deal with a mother he's never really known. It is extraordinary. So I think, the parallels into Vere's life are going to come up, and we're going to look at them.
And that's just the impact of one woman who, as you say, had very little time with him, but he obviously felt so rejected by her.
Yeah.
And that begins his relationship, regardless of whether Edward de Vere is Shakespeare. The man, Edward de Vere's life is shaped quickly, and his relationships with women throughout the rest of his life are shaped very early by that lack of relationship with his mother, Marjorie. And then moving forward, I would say next has to be Mildred Cecil, basically his foster mother, right?
Yes, and we don't know much about that, except we know how she complains about his behavior towards her daughter, and his behavior with the Queen, which she objects to very strongly. But I would say that, yes, he absolutely lacked a mother figure. It's possible that you'll remember his name, who's the lawyer he went to live with, who actually was probably rather nice to him, we think, when he was 4. His wife may have mothered the child. We don't know.
His teacher, right?
Yes,
the
Thomas.
teacher, Thomas.
I can't remember.
You know what? I have listeners who are shouting at their speakers right now, shouting the name now.
Yeah, but
we should both know that, but that's what happens in conversation.
It's just not coming. But you know who I mean.
Of course.
It's possible.
Is it Smith? Is it as simple as Smith?
I think yes, I think it is. It's
is that why we can't think of it? Because it's so easy.
It's possible his wife was good to him, because it's not that he's not cut off from women, but he's hungers. In his plays, people hunger. And when we talk about Hamlet a lot, because, he hungers for that love, but doesn't trust it with Ophelia. He hungers for that love with his mother, but doesn't trust it, quite rightly. And my feeling is that the first person, it was certainly never Anne Cecil, as a 7-year-old to his 11-year-old, though we don't know that.
What we do know about Mildred was that she was such a staunch, Puritan, conservative woman, ruled her household, ruled the roost type of a lady. And so and since he isn't her natural son, and she has natural sons of her own that he grows up with, also part of the problem, right? The relationship he had with the two Cecil boys, particularly, right? So she's not going to provide that nurturing and that love and acceptance, and he's going to continue to feel rejected. We skipped over his sister Mary, who accuses him of being a bastard in order. I think that was a calculated move in order to try to get hold of the finances,
the inheritance.
Right, that was all about money and not about
that
her.
That would have hurt.
But it still damaged him in ways that I don't think we can truly calculate, because we're not living in that time and under those titles.
But also, you don't see much of that in the plays that I would immediately recognise as being his half sister. Though you could say Goneril and Regan, maybe a bit of that. But what I really, really do think is that his passionate attachment to Elizabeth, who was a mother figure,
his first love,
And she came and stayed in Castle Hedingham when he was 11, just before his father died, and she was there. So he would have met her. There would have been plays at that time, and she probably would have flirted with him as any self-respecting woman would like to get the children on her side. Mm-hmm. I certainly gravitate to the kids. I don't pretend I'm anything like Elizabeth. But I think he made a connection with Elizabeth, which explains a lot of the headstrong, difficult, brilliant, educated women. They're all modeled on Elizabeth, I think. And even the ones that go wrong, like with Venus and Adonis, when he writes about Venus. I mean, it's pretty shocking what he writes about her.
Salacious, even.
Oh, pornographic. That poem must have shocked people, Richard. Anyway, we talk about that.
It was certainly very popular.
Yeah,
and I'm certain that was part of the reason.
Yes, and people would not dare to say anything about it, though there was one who did and was immediately declared insane. So, that for me, I want to explore more, maybe my own time, the relationship between the Queen and the writer.
So one of the questions I'd like to ask you, because you mentioned earlier that you've played so many of the female roles. You mentioned Demetrius being your first role, but that later on you've played so many of the female roles. How many of those roles did you play prior to your discovery of the Shakespeare Authorship Mystery and your belief that Oxford is the true Shakespeare? And did you get opportunities to revisit some of those roles with a different mindset now, having a better understanding of the roles because of their connection to the author?
Well, that's a very long question. I think it was a question.
Yeah, well, sort of. It was sort of, give us some anecdotal.
Well, the answer to that is the only Shakespeare role that I've played in theatre, apart from doing conferences every year for the Shakespeare Authorship Trust and the DVS, when the actors try to enliven the rather dull proceedings sometimes by doing bits of Shakespeare. So I'm learning doing that a lot. But the only Shakespeare play I've done professionally, though that is professional, but I mean on a stage, was to play Sir Andrew Aguecheek at Stratford in Twelfth Night. Having played Orsino at school and then having played Viola at Oxford as a student, I then finally got to play Andrew Aguecheek.
My wife is going to love this part of this episode because we just recently, a month or so ago, by the time this episode airs, it will be several months ago, we performed a series of scenes at a winery in Ashland near where we live. And it was a series of scenes that involved or surrounded the drinking of wine because it was being performed at a winery. We cleverly called it Shakespeare Uncorked. And among the several roles that she had to play, one of them was Sir Andrew Aguecheek. So she's going to love hearing that you recently.
I have to say I had a ball.
She did too.
Him.
At first she was like, really? And then she was like, oh, wait a minute. Then as she started getting into the scene and studying the scene, she just threw herself into it. And we put the blonde wig on her and all, the flaxen locks and all of that. And she was hilarious. It was such a fun part of that show.
Oh, it would have been gorgeous. It's a gorgeous part, just gorgeous. And there's something about what he's written. Whoever we might think he's modelled on, Shakespeare makes us love him. The audience love him.
I've read Sydney. I've read
so have I. But I think it's
possibly
too.
Sydney.
I think it's too affectionate a portrait.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point, especially depending on who you believe that Toby Belch is supposed to be and what that relationship is. Although, Toby Belch sort of uses Aguecheek the way that Iago uses Roderigo.
Or Falstaff. He's very like Falstaff, isn't he?
Very much so. In fact, the actor, because we obviously did a scene, we did a Falstaff monologue about drinking from Henry IV.
Yeah.
And then we did this scene from Twelfth Night. And I had the same actor play both of those roles, as a matter of fact. So you're right; they're very comparable.
There's connections, but no, I've been talking because at these conferences, and anyway, I work with Derek Jacobi and Mark Rylance, and we have been asked a few times, what difference does it make when you're playing a part to have views about the author? And all of us agree that it makes no difference whatsoever, because your job is to tell the story of that part. Now, if you're a director, that's a whole different ballgame, because you're framing the piece.
Mm-hmm.
But an actor has to find their way through the beginning, the middle, and the end, and try and make sense of that part. So I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference for an actor. But the thing I did, I don't know, with pandemic, I have no idea about recent past. I can't work out time at all, and I don't know anybody who can. But we did, it must have been live, so it must have been before the pandemic, at one of the Shakespeare Authorship conferences at the Globe Theatre in London. I can't remember what the actual subject was, but there you go. See, I can only remember what I remember. But my job was to read the deposition scene of Richard II as Queen Elizabeth, because she said, "Know ye not that I am Richard II?"
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I have Derek Jacobi on stage with me and Mark Rylance, and I am nobody.
Well, I would disagree with that. There's a photo in your entryway of you with Peter O'Toole. I would say you're not nobody.
Well, compared with them, I am, and thank you. But it's very lovely working with them, by the way, because they are, and Peter was as well, so generous. They are so generous with their time and with when you're doing a scene with them. I played Lady Anne, for instance, with opposite Mark Rylance playing Richard III, and I'd never played Lady Anne, and I'd seen him do his Richard III 2 or 3 times, so he knew 10 times more about it than I did. And we were doing it on Zoom, but it was, when we actually got to perform it, and he was so generous with his time rehearsing with me, and when we got to do it, it was as satisfying to me as playing the part, which I would never get to do now because of my age, but playing the part it was proper connection with the text and with the other person involved. It was just
believe
wonderful.
The greatest compliment that an actor can receive from their peers is that which you just gave to those 3 men that you mentioned, and that is that they are giving actors. And I share that with actors all the time. Is, the best compliment you can ever get is from anyone you've worked with, is that you're a giving, gracious actor, that you provide them not only your time and effort and collaboration in the rehearsal, but also on stage, giving them what they need to do what they do. And I tell actors all the time that, remember, the scene is that the goal is that you're to affect each other and to perform not for the audience, but for each other. Give each other everything you've got so that you can get from each other everything that they've got. And the audience just happens to be lucky enough to sit there and watch it happen in front of them.
Yeah, that's absolute. I couldn't agree more. But you don't always get that.
No, you don't. Egos get involved. What?
Yeah,
Never. Really?
So that was very wonderful for me, because I was able literally to explore in public, in the moment, what was happening to me as Anne. Because I remember saying to Mark, look, it's fine to do this, but I have a question that I have not been able to answer, which is, why does she change her mind about Richard, the man who killed her father, killed her father-in-law, killed her husband, and she, in the space of one scene, she goes off with him? I don't understand how that can happen.
It is a mesmerizing scene for that reason, isn't it?
So he said, well, of course I can't answer that for you. Let's see if we can explore what it is and explore it. And in the end, I found something which allowed me to do that. And I wouldn't be able to articulate what it was, but I sort of understood it. And so I learned a huge amount. And that's the wonderful thing about acting. If you give yourself up to it, not knowing the answers, but knowing what you want to get to, sometimes that thing that happened to me at 5, standing up and clapping my hands to make Tinkerbell well again, I'm going to cry now, the power of that moment, if I ever reach the moment in acting when you are doing something for that reason and that reason only, you learn something yourself. And it's a very wonderful thing.
I think it's one of the reasons why so many of us embrace this craft and continue to explore it for the rest of our lives, regardless of how successful we become at it or how professional we become, as far as professional in the sense of dollar signs. I knew from a very early age that I would do this for the rest of my life, no matter what happened to me. Sometimes I would say to my wife, it's the same. And, I say to her, if I were thrown in prison for the rest of my life, I would create the prison Shakespeare company, because that's what I do. And I wouldn't not be able, I can't not do it. It's a part of who I am, and it's a part of my soul. And so I completely understand what you're talking about, what you're saying. It's one of the reasons why I think that every human being, it's not for everyone, but I do believe that every human being should be in a play at least once in their life. And I think that most people will find that if they do it once, they'll do it again. For some people, they tried it, they're good, I'm done, no thank you. But I think there's so much to be learned just from the experience of working together with other artists, working on something that's larger than yourself, having to put yourself aside for the greater good of the whole. All of those experiences, one of the things that I talk to parents about when I'm teaching their students, your kid may not grow up to be a famous movie star. In fact, odds are they won't. But they will walk away from this experience with life skills that they will use forever. Confidence
and having been part of something, which involves your body, it involves your voice, it involves your heart, it involves your emotions, it involves your mind. And there's very few jobs that actually do all of that in one go. And that's what actors are required to do. And so, yes, I do remember saying I trained as a voice teacher a long, long time ago, and I do teach voice sometimes. But I was teaching Shakespeare and high comedy a few years ago at a drama school, a British and American drama academy. It's just up the road from me, very conveniently. And
that would be?
The British and American Drama Academy.
My wife went there.
Oh my God, and maybe I taught her.
You may have. She spent 6 months there on exchange because she went to USC and she got her theater degree from USC, and they had an exchange program while she was in school at USC. So she lived here in England for 6 months and went to Bada.
When? Do you remember when?
Oh, she's going to be upset at me if I get this wrong, but I'm going to say it has to be somewhere between 13 and 15 years ago.
Oh, well, I might have been teaching her.
She talked, in fact, on my way here to England, she said to me, I said when I was coming here and that you were here in Camden. And
oh, she would remember my name if I taught her, so we obviously did not.
I'm not certain, but I will check with her on that. But she talked about having walked through Regent's Park every day.
Yeah.
Back and forth from the dorms to the school.
That's 5 minutes away. The school is 5 minutes away.
I drove past it on my way here today.
Oh, well, there you go. But I remember saying a very, very good voice teacher there. I wasn't teaching voice then. I was doing Shakespeare and I was doing high comedy, which is very hard for American 18-year-olds to grasp. So again, it's another one. You can get them to get it in the end of 4 weeks. You've done a brilliant job, and it was wonderful fun. But I was complaining to the voice teacher there, who is a terrific voice teacher, who teaches a lot more drama schools than I do, because I can only do so much teaching. I have to focus. I'm still an actor. I don't want to be I don't want only to be teaching. And I said, I think it's a disgrace that in England there are thousands of drama schools who take in hundreds of thousands of students every year and take their money, and there is no job for them when they leave. It's appalling that they are buying into their dreams and draining their purses and their parents' purses, and there won't be anything for them at the end of it. And she said, I profoundly disagree with you. I went, oh, really? Why? And she said, because the skills they learn at drama school, they learn to work as a team, they learn to listen, they learn to express themselves physically, mentally. Everything they learn will be of use to them in whatever job they ever do. And I thought, oh, yes, actually, I said, oh, yes, you're absolutely right. I take it all back.
You're absolutely right. I do think that there is a certain level of insufficient training given to young actors in drama schools about the business of the craft. And
well, most people who are teaching
at that.
Most people who are teaching don't know what the profession requires,
and that's a problem, right?
It's a big problem.
That is a big part of the problem. But I do agree that the life skills are invaluable, and they can't be replicated through almost anything else. You know, I tell actors all the time, especially young students, that acting is a team sport, is as much a team sport as football, baseball, or any other team sport that you want to compare it to. The big difference is, and you're only as strong as your best player or your worst player, right? And the big difference is actors have no opposing team. And everyone who has come to see the performance is rooting for you. You know, if you're in football, half the audience wants you to fail. And there's an opposing team. In theater, the entire audience, in fact, they spent money because they want you to succeed. They came hoping for you to give your best and do your best. I never saw a cast of actors walk off stage and say, oh, we were terrible tonight. The audience played better than we did. It doesn't work that way, right? So I think that's part of the thing that they learn too in being in a part of a production is it's a team and you have no opposing team. So if you fail, it's all on you. It's all on you and your fellow actors and not working together and not cohesing together as a team. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree with you. Of course it is. But the world out there is a very competitive world. And so it's very hard for people when they're, if I go up for a part, which I did yesterday, I bumped into another actress who was clearly up for the same part. So I went and talked to her. It turned out I hadn't seen her for 20 years, but we know each other. Mm-hmm. But we're in competition. We can't both get the part. So we had a laugh about it and said, well, they could just divide it into two, couldn't they? So he could have two mothers. And so off she went to do her reading. But that makes it means we have to be better at being loyal and compassionate, whatever level you're at. And, they speak true when they say, be nice to the people you meet as you go up, because you're going to meet them on your way down. And that's important. But, that's true, whether it's Shakespeare or Pinter or Tennessee Williams. That's the theatre. That's the magic of theatre, if you find it magic. If you don't, there's nothing that, it's hard to know. And, well, people get rooted in their thinking, I think, about theatre, especially as television has taken over so much of our drama. And who knows what's happened with the pandemic. It's taken away our opportunity to go and join with members of an audience for a live performance. We don't know how we're going to recover from that, but I think it's been very, very severe. So
it has, and I can only speak from personal experience in the environment that I'm in, and I can tell you that those who missed it terribly hunger for it even more voraciously than they did prior to the pandemic and support it with more vigor than they did prior to the pandemic. And I think that's, very encouraging and also gives me great hope for the fact that this art form that, is as old as mankind, whether it's, shaman in caves dancing in front of fires, performance art has been with us since the dawn of the age of standing upright. And so I think that it's an inherent part of who we are. Aristotle agreed. He said that we must do this. We don't have a choice. So I think that it won't ever go away, but I do believe it has changed. And I do believe we've had to become more selective about what we're presenting in order to draw the audiences that we wish. And I think that by one of the things that I love about the authorship issue is I think it introduces Shakespeare to Shakespeare lovers in a new and exciting way that makes them more willing to pursue it further and perhaps now want to see a production again that they've seen many, many times before with this new awakening, this new vision of where it came from and what it means and the context of it all.
Yes, of course. I find that fascinating as an audience member. You asked me about how it was as an actor, but as an audience member, going, oh my God, look at that. Of course, it adds a huge extra dimension. But I don't know what it's like in the States. But in England, when I was small, we had quite a lot of people still went to church, which they don't do anymore, and if you went to a wedding or a funeral, you would get the King James's Bible with the language exactly contemporaneous with Shakespeare for us to be familiar with. And at school, the prayers would be the old-fashioned prayers. Mm-hmm. And all of that has gone. And I am really concerned that the links with Shakespeare are getting loosened. It's harder for young people now to understand that language because they haven't been subjected to it in any shape or form anymore. And they don't, a lot of people hate Shakespeare at school because it's not taught very well by teachers who probably don't like it much and have to teach it. But it doesn't create that spark. It obviously did for you, and it obviously did for me, despite Miss McKinley's efforts.
But let's say a little prayer for Miss McKinley, God rest her wherever she...
I did go to her funeral. It's all right. I paid my respects because, she also was honourable in her way, and she put on Shakespeare play after Shakespeare play. So good for her. But I think it is becoming harder. And in school, they don't pay the same attention to Shakespeare that they used to. They think it's old. The education boards think it's old-fashioned and boring.
Well, and now, part of the cancel culture aspect of what's happening in society, Shakespeare is looked upon as, this
elitist,
old white guy, patriarchal character. And unfortunately, in discussion of Oxford as Shakespeare, that doesn't seem to help in the sense that, this aristocrat who lived a life of extreme privilege. But I do think it helps in the sense that we do, at least with Oxford, have so much more than we have with Shakespeare of Stratford in the story of his life and some of the things that we've already talked about here today. The suffering that he went through, the real rejection that he felt from his mother and his sister, the difficulties that he had growing up in the Cecil household, his deep love and attachment to the Queen, but also had to keep a certain distance because he was a subject of her as well as a lover of her. I think, that type of layer of humanity and realism connected to the works might actually help us to some degree stem off the sort of canceling of Shakespeare as the old bald white guy who, stood up for feudalism.
Well, I would like to think that's the case. But I think, yes, if you look at the psychological profile of De Vere, it so matches. And if you feel any sympathy for a boy with that upbringing, with that education, with that background, with those needs, with those desires, there's an emotional connection with the plays. Even, what Alexander Wall calls the remorse plays, the ones where, Othello, Leontes, I can't remember the third one,
Pericles
Thank you.
is one, definitely.
Yeah, where he shows us someone completely out of control persecuting his wife and paying for it at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Othello's a perfect case in point. That, you know, Desdemona steps right out of line to marry someone of a different colour from a different country. And she was owned by her father, and he was one of the Venetian elders, and she took a step right out of line. My God, she paid for it. But more importantly, that man loved her and he destroyed her. And the play is showing you how that can happen. And I think that's why Alexander calls them remorse plays. I mean, Leontes, he has a wife who adores him. He has his best friend stay. His wife is 8 months pregnant, and Leontes, for no reason, conceives the idea that it's not his baby, that she's been unfaithful to him with his best friend, and everything comes to her. And the way that play, it's magic again. I mean, I did play Paulina at school, at drama school, and I lost the contact lens because I couldn't stop crying.
That's a great story.
Happened a few times in my career. But what they go through to be reconciled, and how Leontes has to be humbled and destroyed himself in order to come back with that wisdom and that kindness, it's very hard to understand why somebody would have written a play like that unless they felt that story deeply enough to do it several times, to go over it in different ways to try and make sense of what they've done in their life.
I would argue that All's Well That Ends Well is another one that needs to be added to that list, right?
Absolutely, completely.
And,
yes.
That play is definitely an apology to Anne Cecil in a gazillion ways. And you're right, there are multiple plays, multiple characters, multiple stories where this same theme recurs.
Yeah.
And it's apologetic, it's remorseful, as Alexander would say, and I think it's not just apologetic to her, but also to Elizabeth, his first daughter, and the way he treated her for the first 5 to 7 years of her life.
Well, that may very well be true. Certainly in with Winter's Tale, the thing about the daughter that he rejects, absolutely, had never occurred to me. Thank you very much. That would be very helpful if I ever were to do it again, because that's massively important. But
so that's interesting you would say that, because earlier you said it doesn't matter to the actor, but then now here you got this.
Maybe it will.
I think it does. And I think something else
I'm
you said.
sure it does, really.
Something else you said earlier, because you mentioned Williams and you mentioned Pinter. And I would say to actors because oftentimes actors, I think, use that as a means to avoid the authorship issue, is to say, well, it doesn't matter, we have the plays and that's above me. I'm just an actor. And I think that you wouldn't say that about Williams, and you wouldn't say that about Pinter, and you wouldn't say that about Miller. I don't think you would say that about any other playwright. So why would you say that about Shakespeare?
I so agree with you, and I intend to use modern playwrights to say, oh yes, well, we can't use autobiographical. We can't ever deduce anything from the plays they write. Absolute rubbish when it comes to any other playwright but Shakespeare. And I'm intending to use that and to discuss when, if we're allowed to go that far over time, to say, okay, let's look at Tennessee Williams then. Let's look to see, how does his life inform his work? Can one separate the two? And with any major playwright, we know stuff about them. With this one, there is nothing to know.
And, I love the parallels between Shakespeare and Williams, because I think the interesting thing about Williams is the autobiographical nature of his work is the female characters. I think he is Blanche Dubois, for instance, right? And I think that that's an interesting thing that you have to know about the work in order to capture those roles. My wife is a big fan of Summer and Smoke, which is a play that's not very often done by Williams. And I can't remember the lead character's name in that play.
Can't help you. I've never seen
No,
it.
but again, I think it's just another incarnation of Williams. And I think
his obsession with his mother,
yes,
and his circumstances,
yes, mm-hmm,
that he could allow a lot out through the women characters that he needed to get out. So I wanted to tell you, and I can't remember why, but just before that, that I was, the reason I think I was able to make the leap very late in my life about the authorship question and take it on as much as I did is because when I said as a teenager, what does it matter who wrote the plays? We have them to use, and that's all that matters. But you mentioned that I was in a rock group in the 70s. I don't think you mentioned it was the 70s, but that's when I formed a rock group, a 3-woman rock group. And it was completely different. There hadn't been ever a 3-woman rock group in England.
You were the Spice Girls before the Spice Girls ever thought about being the Spice Girls.
The Spice Girls could not have happened without us. We have our little group, which failed ultimately. We were the precursor to Little Mix. Every single female group that's happened since, they've all had different personalities, sizes, looks. They've used their differences to make an impact and to say things about themselves. But before my group, Rock Bottom, the 3 were almost always American, black. They wore the same wigs. They saw the same costumes. There would be one lead singer, and the others were background singers. It's who we're talking about, the Supremes here, and everybody else. But I formed a group that was wholly different. We were all actresses for a start. We'd all done West End musicals, but we were actors in principle who sang. We were all 30, which is 12 years too late to form a group if you're women, because they only like you very young. So we formed it ourselves. We had no backing.
There's some sad truth to that, even still.
I know. There's a cutoff point for almost everything for women much earlier than for men. And we just ignored it. And when they said, "Oh, you can't do that, my dear," and I mean, sorry, but, you're writing your own material. No, you don't do that. And I said, well, that's what we're doing. And they said, but, you all looked so different. We wouldn't know how to market you. So, but that's the whole point. We are different. There's one 6-foot, scarlet-haired, upper crust woman with a jazz voice. There's one 5'1" ballet dancer come hoofer with an amazing Judy Garland voice, black-haired, working class, and there's me, blonde, middle-class, Oxford graduate in the middle who does Shakespeare. And they said, this can't work. Well, it did work, and it worked so phenomenally. There was electricity between us from the moment we thought the 3 of us were together. And we just did it all ourselves without any backing whatsoever. I borrowed the money from my bank to rent a Sunday night of the King's Road Theatre where the Rocky Horror Show is playing. And in fact, the guy who's producing it, Michael White, was lovely. I went to him with the idea and he said, "This is great. I'm going to give you the theatre for nothing, but you're going to have to pay for lighting and sound and usherettes," which came to something like £300, which I had to borrow from my bank. And I had nothing at all. But he said, no, the bank manager, in those days when we had bank managers, and I knew him, he said, yes, we'll lend you the money. And I was able to pay it back. So we did it completely. We did the fly posting up and down the King's Road and in the West End ourselves, We did everything. And it snowballed. It was unbelievably successful. And it took off so fast that we couldn't handle it. And we had nobody to advise us, of course. We didn't have managers, didn't have producers, didn't have anything. And it got stolen by a television company who made a series written by a close friend of mine. And it was about us and it was for us. And it was called the Rock Bottom series. And then, who knows what happened? I'll never know. It got stolen and they refused to acknowledge us or use us. So they cast lookalikes they denied us completely, and it became a cult television series called Rock Follies. And Rock Follies, of course, which is based on a tall, red-haired, aristocratic woman, a short, dark-haired, working-class girl with a wonderful voice, Julie Covington, and the rather neurotic, blonde, middle-class girl who plays Shakespeare in the middle. And that became a huge hit. And that is what, of course, has influenced Mamma Mia. Mamma Mia, the show, would never... What do they have? They have a blonde girl in the middle. They have a short, dark-haired, bubbly, funny one. And they have a tall, red-haired one who drops dry comments. Mm-hmm. And when I saw it, everybody, the whole audience on its feet cheering and clapping at the end of Act One when they get into their old, don't know if you've ever seen the show. Did they have it in America?
Mamma Mia?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, it's huge. In fact, they just did it in the community I live in this last year.
They get into their 70s gear from when these three women had been a band together, and they sing Dancing Queen at the end of Act One.
Right.
And everyone goes berserk. And I'm sitting there in floods of tears because it was us. And we should have been doing it.
In fact, as I look over my right shoulder here in your living room, I see in the corner a set of boots with 6-inch heels.
Oh, yeah, platform
made out of
boots.
Gold lame, it looks like.
Yeah.
Are those a souvenir?
They're my show boots. Yes.
I had a feeling that's where they...
Well noticed, yes. Pride of place in my living room.
I figured that's where they hearkened from. We all sort of have our performance shrines, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
I have
my whole apartment is a performance shrine, let's face it.
I have pieces of furniture and artwork that regularly leave the house and end up on a set for a stage play for a while and then return back to their position where they belong in the house once the show run is over.
Yeah. Well, of course, that group was very, very dear to me. It was the only time, really, I had an original creative idea that I followed through. We all have lots of ideas. We don't do much about them generally. But this one, I followed it through for very good reasons. If you ever want to know what those reasons were, you would need to read my memoir called The Real Rock Follies, in which it's clear where, like it is clear with Shakespeare, those things that hit you emotionally are what power you. And if you can ride them, they explain why somebody like me, who had not really ever stepped out of line much, sued the television company and drove it through 7 years to get to the High Court to claim that idea as mine, and won, which is a very wonderful thing. So, but it didn't give me back my group.
No.
And that was my biggest chance for real independence and success that I could ever have, where we ignored all the men. It was the women who did it. And that's painful. But the reason I'm telling you is because it's in the light of having been believed and respected and trusted by a High Court judge, who is the highest place I could go to in the land, who believed me over EMI and a major television company and the head of drama of that company and the producer of the Rock Follies series and the writer of that Rock Follies series. He believed me. And that I know is what made me, when I realized there might have been an injustice done over the Shakespeare question.
That was where I was going to ask. Is that the parallels there are, pretty compelling,
aren't they? So that is, of course, that opened my whole world up to loads of other injustices. The same year that we won the court case, I readopted my childhood principles of not having anything killed for me to eat. I was a vegetarian until I was 16, and then I abandoned it. For social reasons, really. I just didn't want to be different. Mm-hmm. It's too awkward. And the same month that we won the court case, I became a vegetarian again. And so the field was wide open for me to say, all right, what's important to me now? And the injustice of having your creative life being given credit by somebody else, even if you'd chosen to do that.
Well, I was going to say, and the evidence that, from my perspective, appears that he did it very willingly at first on purpose to disguise his identity, and then later because he was forced to as part of the deal, part of the bargain that he made with the Cecils.
But possibly as well that part of the way his philosophy was self-abnegation, and that he believed that it was not important that his name was there. That may all be true, but for me, if he wrote those plays, I want his name on them.
Good for you. And so many of us who have come to this cause, I believe, are as passionate about it as you are for that very reason, that we and especially the artists that I know that who are passionate about this. And it's something about our hearts. There's that wonderful moment. There's the very famous PBS Frontline episode where they interviewed Charlton Ogburn.
I've never seen it.
Oh
my
God! Oh, you must. You can't. It's not
Netflix.
It's not in
YouTube.
print. You can find a very poorly sort of filmed off of a TV screen copy on YouTube, or they used to be able to.
I'll look for it.
Please do it, and it's PBS Frontline.
Okay.
And I forget the title exactly, but if you type that in, you'll probably find it. And they're interviewing him, and it wasn't long. I don't believe it was too long before he ended up passing. But they're interviewing him and they're asking him about it, and he starts explaining his passion for it. And just like you did, and just like I do when I talk about this, he tears up in the episode. For the TV cameras, he gets so passionate about it, he tears up about it because he feels the injustice towards this man that has been committed. And I think that there's so many of us who feel that way, and we want to right this wrong, and we've become sort of, Rosemary Laughlin explained the difference to me between a barrister and a solicitor, but I suppose that we have become sort of the solicitors on behalf of Edward de Vere, just like you must have had to have a solicitor when you took your case to the High Court.
You have two things, and I would say I'm regarding my role as the barrister. The barrister is the one who tells the story in court.
Okay.
He represents you in court. The solicitor is the one you tell the story to, who finds all the evidence that will back it up.
Okay.
And prepares the case for the barrister.
So we're both of those things for Edward,
yeah.
right? We serve Edward on that behalf.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, Annabel, it's been a magnificent conversation. I'm so thrilled. Thank you so much for welcoming me to your home and for sharing with me the project you're working on and your history as an actress. We could talk about theater and Shakespeare forever, I'm certain.
Couldn't we?
Before we wrap up the episode, please give us some hints into this master series. You said the first one is completed and almost ready to be produced out there. It's Romeo and Juliet. What's next, and what's on your list? I know you mentioned like there would be 5 or 6 of them. You must have some sort of a charted path.
Well, we've decided that we will do 8 to start with of the most popular. And Juliet, obviously, Lady Macbeth, obviously. Rosalind, you're quite right. The biggest part, but Cleopatra.
Sure, the largest tragedy part.
Yeah, have to do Catherine of the Taming of the Shrew. We have to do Gertrude and Ophelia.
Sure. And is Beatrice on your list, I'm assuming, from Much Ado About Nothing?
Is what?
Beatrice from Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh, in a perfect world, yes, because I always wanted, that's 2 parts I always wanted to play. One was Miss Adelaide in Guys and Dolls. And it
really?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes. And it got down when the National Theatre were doing it in the early 80s. It got down. It was between me and Julie Mackenzie, and I will never forgive them for not giving it to me. But the other part I always wanted to play was Beatrice, having seen it at Stratford with Sir John Gielgud and Peggy Ashcroft, who were the luminaries when I was a teenager, and then I got to play that at Regent's Park. So, yes, I would want that included. But it will probably be a lot of what is on the exam syllabus for the schools, to start with, just so that, it will be useful guidelines for them.
We're doing Much Ado in June.
Are you?
As our Shakespeare in the Park production in Southern Oregon through my Shakespeare company, and that's a bucket list role for my wife as well. So she'll be playing Beatrice in June.
She'll have
so
a most wonderful time doing
to
it.
Scratch that one off of her list.
We were rained off. It was a bad summer, and because Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, which is the most glorious theatre, smack in the middle of Regent's Park, if it rains, it's difficult. And we were rained off for more performances, I think, than we were able to complete. And it's always been a real...
That just happened to us this last year with Midsummer Night's Dream, and it was a fluke weather in late June to have so much rain that we had. And we got rained out half of our performances. Luckily, we were able to add a few extras to meet the demand, because the audiences were upset because we were sold out and we had to cancel.
I had my
fingers crossed that it doesn't happen to us again this year for Much Ado About Nothing.
And I'm touching wood for you. But I know close, deep friends of mine came twice to see it, and we managed 20 minutes and stopped. So and it will always hurt me. I haven't had enough of Beatrice. She's the most, when she was born, a star danced, and it's the most magical thing.
Yes.
To play. You walk into shoes. Merry shoes, if you like, though she has a huge core of emotional drive and loyalty and commitment. But she mostly, apart from that big scene, she dances her way through her difficulties.
And, again, one of those strong female roles who steps out of the norm. Here, we're not, it's never explained to us where her parents are or what happened to her parents and how she comes to live with her uncle, Leonardo, but it's obvious that her parents are not around and that he is her guardian. And you would think under those circumstances, especially 15th century Italy, Messina on the island of Sicily, that she would become, if she's his ward, she becomes basically chattels and whoever he decides she's going to marry, but she's allowed to be this sort of, that wonderful speech she gives about, I go to St. Peter and he takes me to where the bachelors sit, and I will never marry a man without a beard, and I would never marry a man with a beard. And it's just a wonderful scene and a wonderful moment.
Well, excuse me, now you have said that. Look at what Queen Elizabeth did right through her reign. Oh, I'm in love with Alençon, my little frog. I'm going to have you. Oh, no, I will go into the... She teased and did that the entire time. How could she marry a Protestant because of what would happen to the Catholics? How could she marry a Catholic because of what the Protestants would do? So she danced that line. I could never marry a man with a beard. I could never marry... she did exactly that, didn't she?
She did.
Oh, I'm so pleased you said that, because that is brilliant. I can use that, because eventually there will be a series with or without the DVS about Shakespeare's heroines and Elizabeth.
Fantastic.
So that's what I'm aiming at.
Fantastic idea.
A long way ahead.
And so
maybe we can work on it together.
I would love that. And I would say, take it a step further and insert that the author's autobiographical character is Benedict, and offering himself to be the only partner that a woman like Beatrice could possibly have. And I think we see that in A Midsummer Night's Dream, in Oberon being the only true partner that Titania could have. And you see that in Antony and Cleopatra, and you see that again and again throughout the plays. And I think there is a recurring message there that he is sending to her, that I am the man for you. And you know it deep in your heart that I am the man for you. And unfortunately, it just could not be, right?
Well, that's lovely too. No, okay, we'll work on that as well, won't we?
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fun.
Thank you so much again for inviting me into your lovely home and sharing this time with me and my listeners. Look forward to seeing your presentation at the DVS event, which by the time everyone's listening to this will have passed, long past, but they'll be able to find more from you very soon, I'm sure, through the Vere Society website, as your master classes are ready and presented and put there for viewing.
And if I may add one little codicil.
Please.
That if you are interested in the memoir I wrote about my rock group, it is called The Real Rock Follies. And it came out in 2017, and you can get it in England, and I hope you can get it in the States.
I'm sure if it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
Yes, then you can get it all over the world. And I have listeners all over the world.
It's another story that I think, for me, is profoundly important and needs to get out there. It's about women doing stuff that they're not meant to do, and it's 40 years ago, but it has changed things. So every generation has their own fights to find their way through, and women are knocked back continually in different ways every generation. So this is just an encouragement to say what 3 women did in 1973 that actually blasted a hole in the music and the entertainment business forever for everybody. Here endeth the lesson.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Before we conclude this episode, I want to remind you all that you can find links to more information about Annabel and our other guests by visiting our Patreon page, where we post details about the show, past and future episodes, fun facts, and more. Just click on the red Patreon button on our homepage, and you can find everything you need right there. Don't forget also to visit the Quiller Swag Shop, where you can find fun Don't Quill the Messenger merchandise to help you show off your Quiller pride and prompt conversations with interesting people wherever you go. You can also potentially win free merchandise by subscribing at the appropriate level and gaining your entry into our Quiller of the Month contest. So many loyal Quillers have already been selected, and due to our computer-based random selection tool, you could even possibly win multiple months in a row. All the links and details are available at our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com. And here with us to help announce this month's Quiller of the Month is, of course, our very own producer, Jake.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and hello to all of our loyal listeners, and I hope the holiday season is treating you well and that you are enjoying it, spending time with your loved ones, your family, both blood and adopted, and that you get everything that you ask for, of course, assuming you were good this year. And speaking of those who were good this year, it is time to name December's Quiller of the Month. Once again, I'm given the privilege. The way this works is all qualifying patrons at the respective tiers that get entries, some of them get multiple entries, into this monthly contest are put into the wheel of names that we use to randomize our winner. Without further ado, it's time I do just that. And the December Quiller of the Month is Sandi Boney. Sandi Boney, maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. Maybe it's Boney, Sandi Boney. I am not sure how to pronounce it, but I know how to pronounce it as winner, W-I-N-N-E-R. Congrats for winning the December Quiller of the Month contest, Sandi. Please keep an eye on your email. We will send a message there to explain to you how to claim your winnings. Thank you. Thanks to each and every one of you for your continued support of the show, to all of our patrons. A very happy holidays to you all from me personally. And back to you, Stephen, to wrap this up.
Thank you, Jake. And congratulations to our December winner. I know many of you are keeping track and counting the days down to our 4th anniversary. It's hard to believe that season 4 is coming to an end, but rest assured that Jake and I are busy planning our anniversary episode, which will also fall in line with our 100th episode. It is incredible to believe that we will soon have 100 regular episodes in our Don't Quill the Messenger library. And that doesn't even include the special episodes and bonus features we have also recorded over the years. As we approach this great milestone, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts about your favorite episodes of all time. Send suggestions for episodes to be included in Season 5. And, of course, any other comments, criticisms, or suggestions that you have or want to send our way, just email contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Send in those suggestions for future episodes. And more importantly, send us some comments about your favorite moments over the past 4 years. Favorite episodes, favorite topics, favorite guests, favorite funny things that we've said or done over the years. Please send those in and we will review those when we do our anniversary 100th episode Jubilee coming up in just a few weeks. So thank you all for that. And we'll look forward to receiving those emails at contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. And until next time, Quiller Nation, say it with me out loud so that those who are near you can hear you. Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.